For me, a lot of times that reevaluation comes after a child's 3, and so they'll have to go through their insurance to come back to me. But if there is an opportunity, if we get the children in young enough and they can do a second medical diagnostic evaluation, we'll use that opportunity.
Okay. Because he did get the diagnosis of autism. She was kind of on the fence about it, just because he's very social and he makes great eye contact. And I know that's not the only piece of autism, right. but you know, every other piece, if you look at the definition of autism, he has all those other pieces, but she was like, that social piece, that's just, you know, so she was like, come back in a year, but she still gave him the autism diagnosis. So I didn't know, I was like, well, so does it stay? You know, because there are benefits to having that autism diagnosis, you know, for school, for insurance, for all those things. So I didn't know if it stayed, you know, like kind of, you know, that was just there, but.
It's such a great question, and I think the practice, people practice a little bit differently. There's not a consensus about this. Some people give a rule-out diagnosis if they're still considering that maybe it might not be. Some people, and when I say rule-out diagnosis, I mean it cannot be ruled out at this time. Sorry, that doesn't make sense sometimes. But, and sometimes I may say, you know, I have concern for possible autism spectrum, or but people do talk about, and in research it is talked about the stability of an autism spectrum diagnosis and how can we make a stable diagnosis. So I think with the right assessment tools and the right experienced clinician, you can be a lot more accurate and a lot more sure in your diagnosis. So it's an interesting thing, getting a diagnosis, and then would that go away? It's hard to, you know, it's hard to know. Then was that the appropriate diagnosis in the first place?
Or would they then diagnose with like a sensory processing disorder or some other language disorder?
Right.
And so then, so is it worth it to go back, do you think? And I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about just in general, like if you
have the opportunity to, I think, especially if there's a question of the diagnosis, and it is approved for, you know, for payment.
I think it's a comprehensive evaluation. It's only available till 3, so.
Sometimes I think these kids just go through so much, you know, they go through so many evaluations, and I know my son does all the time, and so it's just hard thinking about just, you know, and then it's also hard for the parents too, because you're constantly hearing about the things that they always have to work on and the negative pieces. And so just personally, like Parker has a school evaluation coming up, and then a week later it'll be the medical diagnostic. So it's like, how much can we put him through, and then how much can you take as a parent? And you know, so that's another piece of it, just coming from a professional, like talking to these parents, probably just, it's so hard hearing all these things. So, you know, I'm thinking to myself, do I want to go through this again? But if it's beneficial, you know.
Well, I think hitting school at 3 years old with the a good assessment gives your child such an advantage going into the IEP process. And they will know what targets they need to hit for their goal statements. They'll know what kind of classroom would be appropriate, what kind of curriculum.
And actually at this upcoming diagnostic, when is his birthday? He turns 3 in January. So those could be good questions. I mean, the school isn't gonna do everything we say, but you know.
You also have to tell the school.
I'm sorry?
You don't have to tell the school.
True, no, true, but if you wanted to say, if you wanted to ask the professionals at the diagnostic clinic and say, just knowing him and having seen him now twice, what kind of classroom environment do you think would be beneficial for him? Just, you know, because I'm going into this IEP, you know, and I'm not sure what they're gonna suggest. And sometimes, do you write that in their report? You'll say,
Yeah,
you know,
I
they
won't-
would do well in a blended classroom or a
Right.
self-contained classroom or
That's a
whatever.
really good point.
And you're right, you don't have to share it with the school, but you could,
Right.
if you wanted to, and it might be written down from a team, you know, just
Well, I think
like,
a lot of parents just like, they don't like that label sometimes, the autism label, and so everyone was like, you don't have to tell anybody at the school, you don't, and I'm like, I don't really care, whatever helps your kid, but, there's just so many questions that parents have, so.
right, well, when you're closer to 3 though, I think that's just another
That's a
team
really,
you can
really
weigh
good
in
point.
on, you know?
Mhm.
Right.
I feel like we're like consultants, you know, like, we don't see the day-to-day, but,
Right.
you know, we can give an opinion.
Right.
If I can build on what she just said, so now my daughter's in first grade, and I mentioned she had her IEP just this morning, we still do that. So I'll still take her whenever I can get her in, it's usually a month or 2 before some kind of IEP review or a major change moving from school to school. I'll work with her speech therapist and her other supports and say to the doctor, here's where she's coming from and here's what we think the plan's gonna be, what do you think? And she'll say, this is great, maybe add 30 more minutes here, or think about this there. And then, like, my next step now, after we got Emma's IEP settled today, is I'll go back to the doctor probably next month, I think, and say, okay, here's where we settled. Do you think we need any additional outside support? So, and we'll continue to do that throughout her school, you know, until we figure this out, to be quite
I
honest
mean,
with
you
but
are one of the best examples of, no, truly, how,
I
because,
don't know what I'm doing. So.
okay, well, no, you do.
Just
Because
that alone is.
now your child is older than 3,
Yeah.
and you don't have a service coordinator.
Right.
So,
And my
you're
service
it.
coordinator wasn't great.
Well-
So I had a really bad PI experience, unfortunately, but I had a great early childhood experience, so,
Oh, that's good.
so that was really wonderful.
But no, you are the service coordinator in some
Yes.
respects, you know,
Yes.
because you are, and even, I don't know, I feel like I have this different perspective because I come from the medical world and now I'm in the early intervention world, that it's the same kid that's receiving all of these services, you know, and so you're the constant, you know, as the parent. And so I feel like sometimes it's really stressful for you to have to tell the doctors what the therapists are saying, and for you to tell the therapists at school what the doctors are saying, and then, you know, you got me who's not in the school or a doctor, you know, so, no, I'm just joking, but, you know, you kind of have to navigate all of that,
So
so.
connect everybody together, and it's important, so I just keep doing
So when the medical diagnostic clinic is over, and it's not 3 years old, that you do see kids pretty much annually, right, to check in on them if you can?
Yeah, almost always. I recommend following up with a developmental behavioral pediatrician because I understand that a child at 2.5 is not going to be the same child at 3.5 or 4.5, or going into kindergarten, or learning to read, or all of these things. And so I think those kiddos deserve to have a relationship, an ongoing relationship, the kids and the families, to help you through this process of navigating special education, outside therapies, community programs, other assistance, forms of assistance too, whether it be social security assistance, all these other kinds of things that it can help with. And so I think just having that relationship, and also, if there's need for ordering any equipment or letters of medical necessity, or maybe an evolution of development that there's a need for a medication because of attention or focus or behavior or sleep or any of these things, So yes, I have an ongoing relationship with all these kids.
And for us, it's very validating to say, here's my plan, am I doing this right? For the doctor to say, you're doing fine, or maybe think about this, or maybe think about that, so.
That's right. Well, and I think at the medical diagnostic clinic, another good thing, I mean, as a consultant or whatever, sometimes, you see kids with really comprehensive IFSP plan, service plans.
Yep.
And then sometimes it's like, whoa, we really think an occupational therapist would be helpful here, and there isn't one, and you found that for them, or whatever, or he's never had a hearing test, right? So like, it's just like an outside person who looks at everything and just sees if we can see if we can plug any of these holes, you know, or make sure you're checking every box. You know?
Right.
I have this article that I found from Psychology, Research, and Behavior Management Journal. It's from 2017, and what I can do is I have your emails from when you signed in, or if you did it online, I have your email. I can send you a copy. It's a full text version. I find it very parent-friendly, which many of the journal articles are not. But there was this one line I wanted to say. There was
What's the title of it?
the title. Clinical impact of early diagnosis of autism on the prognosis and parent-child relationships. So it basically is just talking about why do we do the medical diagnostic from birth to 3? You know, this is, it's an early time to get a diagnosis, although in some cases when you get a diagnosis at birth, it's, you know, kind of late, right? So it just is how you think about it. But I just highlighted some of this, but I can send you guys all the link to this. I find it very interesting. But it says, despite early parental concerns, children were sometimes diagnosed later than would be helpful. So late diagnosis is associated with increased parental stress and delays early intervention, which is critical to positive outcomes over time. This is particularly important because studies have found that interventions implemented before age 4 are associated with significant gains in cognition, language, and adaptive behavior. There are reliable diagnostic methods that can make a reliable diagnosis by age 2 and even before
18
age 2.
months, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was the next sentence.
Yeah.
But then it says, despite the availability of reliable methods for early diagnosis, the average age at which a child receives a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder is currently between 4 and 5 years old. So there's a great need to minimize, you can read this, but there's a great need to minimize the time between when a child can receive a diagnosis and when they're actually diagnosed, because they're showing that the earlier you have a diagnosis, the more access to services you have and the better your long-term prognosis. And I'm just going to say one more thing because you can read this, but I just, from the City of Support side, just want to say that reports indicate that parents and family members without adequate support and direction can experience extreme stress, especially around the tumultuous time of diagnosis. Parents who currently attend support groups have more adaptive coping strategies than non-attenders. And external family coping strategies, including community, social, and spiritual support, as well as the informal support and respite care provided by friends and family, is very important. Oh, and currently online support groups are gaining popularity. So read this. Right? I mean, well, and then there's tons and tons of resources and references, but I'm very gentle when I bring it up to families because I know it sounds scary. Medical diagnostic clinic. I thought we were just doing speech therapy here, you know. So I'm really gentle about it, and I just say, like all families, you want to know that you're doing everything you can for your child. And there's this service that's only available till 3 years old. And just so you know, it's a whole team, and it's like, I like the word consultant. It's just, another set of eyes on your child to help see if we're missing anything. I remember the doctor who was at the hospital before you would say, he would say that he would read reports and he would say, this child hasn't made progress in 2 years. Aren't we curious, why that's happening? Because that's not so typical. That's the reason to refer. He would say, where's the curiosity? We, as providers, we should be curious about that kid, so.
Not worrying about hurting people's feelings is also a very important thing. And I want to say, actually, and maybe some of you might have some experience out of state, but the medical diagnostic clinic is not necessarily an enforceable part of a federal law. So this is something Illinois has created. It is not, state to state, there are not clinics like this, so it's kind of a benefit, if you could say there's a benefit of living but the medical diagnostic clinic you don't hear of, and I've gone to a few other states and asked, how do you diagnose your kids with autism? And that's part of why the diagnostic age is so much greater across the country, because they don't have programs like this where we're catching kids. And I feel like the original intent of the medical diagnostic clinic, going back to my first remarks, was that this is a way for people who are in the home working with the child to refer directly to a medical evaluation, and in a sense it acts as a check on the medical system and a safety net for these kids so they're not falling through the cracks and showing up on the first day of kindergarten with severe blatant autism, and everyone says, where have you been for 5 years? You know, that still happens every once in a while, and I see those kiddos in my clinic, and I consider it an absolute failure of our system that a child has gotten